Have you ever stumbled upon a dark family secret? Story 1. Throwaway account. I found out over Christmas whilst doing a family history search online that my dad had fathered 2 children by a different woman about 20 years ago. Side note, he and my mother have been married for over 35 years. His name brought up results for not only myself and my 2 brothers' births, but 2 other births. He has very unusual first and last names, so curiosity got the better of me, and I started to find out more. The births were registered in north of England in the Newcastle area. This rang alarm bells immediately because my dad had worked in this region for 5 years with the company he worked for in the early 98s. I was only a little kid and I missed him so much, and so did my brothers and mom. He worked on a 2-week-on, 2-week-off rota, though, so he was always back and forth. Then I dug a little deeper, just to confirm. I found the children, now grown women, Facebook pages. They still used the last name given to them at birth, our fathers. I didn't contact them because I had a suspicion they'd have no idea they had siblings, and my suspicions were confirmed when I contacted their mother on there instead. At first, I told him I was a relative of my dad's, and I wanted to know more about any children he potentially had because I was trying to track him down. She confirmed that he was the father of her children after I sent her some details and a photo from that time. She proved it 100% by scanning and sending me copies of the birth certificates and some photos she had of him and their daughters when they were just babies. And she told me to call her. I called her. I can't say I was ever nervous or anxious about this call, but I remember feeling livid. Livid at him mostly, for what he'd done to my mother and us as a family, whilst he had supposedly been working hard and all alone up north, whilst his wife and children sat on their thumbs in Wales, patiently waiting for his return every 2 weeks for 5 years. I told her my name and that I was actually his daughter, his only daughter I thought up until that moment, and that I had 2 other brothers who were older, and my parents had, in fact, been married for over 35 years. This poor woman screeched down the phone crying. She never knew any of this. When she met my father, it was in a pub in Newcastle about 3 months after he had moved up there. He said he was single and didn't have any family, and was from Wales, but he lied about the area in which he grew up. A couple of months later, they were expecting their firstborn, and about a year after that, a second daughter. She said when he went back to Wales every 2 weeks, she thought it was for work-related stuff and that he would call every other evening from a local phone box because he didn't have a landline. When the daughters were just little kids, the oldest being about 3, he left one day to go to Wales and work and never came back. She tried to contact his company he worked for, and they said he no longer worked for them. This was around about the time, to my knowledge, his 5 years in Newcastle was up. He had left the company and moved back to Wales. Because he had lied about where he lived in Wales, she was unable to track him, and now being left with 2 girls and no job, she had to get on with it. After about a month, she realized he wasn't going to contact them again, and he was gone. Wherever. She didn't have a clue he had a massive family with wife and kids and a mortgage and a dog back home in Wales, and if she had, she definitely would not have got into a relationship with him, least of all had kids. I haven't brought it up with him, obviously, because of my mother, but Christmas was so difficult for me personally knowing this. For 2 days leading up to Christmas, I got so blind drunk and messed up I slept for 18 hours straight on Christmas Day and missed the whole thing. My father was fuming I'd ruined Christmas, and I very nearly then exploded, but I kept my mouth shut. Then, on Boxing Day, I got a call again from the mother in Newcastle telling me she had told her daughters very delicately what had happened. I had contacted her, revealed everything, and that she will leave it up to them to decide what to do. So far, they have done nothing. I have not been in contact with them at all, and vice versa since. However, the mother did call me around February time to check in with me and see how I was. She's a very nice woman, and was curious if I was visiting the North in the future and if she would like to meet them. I told her I would think about it. I'm actually visiting Newcastle for a hen party in 2 months, so I'm thinking about it more. Part of me hopes one day they come knocking on our door because they know where to go now. Part of me doesn't because of my mother. Over the past 7 months, my relationship with my father has disintegrated and is the chief cause of his stress. It's so bad he's telling me it's exacerbating his heart condition, which he is on pills for. My parents are laying it down to some kind of mid-20s rebellion, because I didn't have a rebellion when I was a teenager, apparently. I just want to kick him in the face every time I see him. The next step in this saga is to tell my eldest brother. He is serious and mature and will be able to deal with it a bit better, I think. He's never had a great relationship with my dad for some reason, so I'd like him to know. His wife, my best friend, already knows there is something wrong with me because I think I'm pretty much having a breakdown over it. The burden is too tough. I'm even struggling with my job. Part of the reason I want them to knock on our door looking for their dad is so that the weight is lifted. But how do you go back from that? My mother is a proud but fragile woman, and it will destroy her. If you got this far, thanks for reading. This helped. Edit. Wow, flipping wee, I did not expect such an amazing response to this. I thought it would just sink to the bottom of the thread unread for the most part. You guys have been amazing. I can't tell you how liberated I felt after sharing it and still a bit scared. After I posted it, which was morning here in the UK and I'd stayed up all night, I smoked a joint and fell asleep upset over the whole thing. But a little relieved I'd shared. Then when I woke up, I panicked that I'd done something as stupid as sharing it online. So I come on here to delete, but wow, you guys have sent me dozens and dozens of comments and private messages, and I can't tell you how much strength and inspiration you've given me. I've sat here the last 2 hours reading all the comments and trying to respond to all of them, and I've laughed, I've cried, I've felt so much better. You guys are awesome. To those asking for an update, someone suggested I post an update to /r/self when there is something to tell. Well, I've decided I'm going to share the burden with my older brother this Friday. I don't want to suffer anymore. Work forced to take me 2 weeks unspent holiday days because they knew I had been feeling stressed. All I'm doing is sitting home, drinking and smoking candy. I think I'm having a breakdown, and a problem shared is a problem halved, right? So after I have told my brother on Friday, you guys will hear about it on /r/self. Stay tuned. Again, thank you so much for all the kind comments. I love Reddit. Peace to all of you. Story 2. My dad recently told me a family story of one of his older, distant relatives. We'll call her Jill, mainly because I don't remember her name. This all happened some 70 years ago, a good 20 years before my father was born. It's a bit unclear what actually happened, but I'll try my best to piece it together. Jill was a plain-looking girl who was raised on a small country farm. Being a bit of a quiet tomboy, she didn't go to school but took care of the farm's horses instead. One day in her teenage years, Jill was in the stables when something spooked one of the horses. It reared up and kicked Jill in the face. Since there was very limited medical surgery, she ended up somewhat disfigured and scarred. She withdrew from much of society and lived solely on the farm as a hermit. Years of isolation pass, and one day Jill vanishes. Perhaps her immediate family knew, but no extended family were ever told what happened. That is it, until they were notified of her death 4 years later. You see, it turns out, Jill had run away and enlisted in the army. She had fought overseas in WW and had been terminated. Now that might not seem like much of a story, but keep in mind that only men fought in WW2. Jill had somehow managed to pose as a man for 4 years in the army without being detected, and it was her death that gave her away. Considering the rest of my family history isn't very exciting, I think it's a pretty cool story. Story 3. My cousin is actually most likely my sister. Edit, for all those who asked. It's actually my stepdad's side of the family. My cousin is 3 years older than I am. As she told me, apparently my stepdad had some sort of hook, affair, or fling with his brother's wife. That's when she, my aunt, got pregnant. At some point, they confessed to my cousin after her mom passed away and gave her the option to find out for sure. She decided she didn't want to know. For me, it explains why she used to come life with us off and on, and also why my cousin is closer to my stepdad than I am, even though he and my mom have been together since I was a few months old. Story 4. This story is kind of messed up, but I think Reddit might enjoy it in a dark way. So we always had a bunch of pets growing up, and one day we find this pet rabbit in our yard. We knew the stupid neighbors up the street had bought 3 rabbits and crammed them into a small cage and kept letting them escape. Since we already had returned one and another had already been hit by a car, we said fudge it and kept him. We named him Angel, and he grew into this monstrous cute thing with big dark eyes and lopsided ears. He also had this nasty habit of sitting in his own cow all day. Even though he already had a bed box and a huge cage, he would always sit in his own cow. And we cleaned it sometimes twice daily, but the big dude was a machine, so about once a week we had to give him a bath. We had originally kept him inside for some reason, although we already had 2 rabbits that lived in a hutch outside, but he grew so flipping big and was so hairy and smelly that finally my mom had had enough and moved his cage to just outside the door. 3 days later, that rabbit was flipping dead. We never knew the cause and thought perhaps a spider bit him. But we enjoy picking on my mom, and so we would joke with her, "That poor rabbit. Just 3 days after you banished him outside into the cold, cruel world, and he passed away of a broken heart." and stuff like that. But the crazy thing is that she would get all teary-eyed, even years after he passed away, which we thought was crazy, and made it even funnier. One night, my whole family and my boyfriend are home, and we start teasing her about Angel's death again for whatever reason, and she suddenly snaps at my dad, "Can't I just tell them already?" We fell silent and were like, asterisk, what the fudge, asterisk. So my mom starts crying and tells us that she did know the truth behind why Angel passed away. Apparently, upon lifting his dead body out of the cage, a whole flood of maggots came pouring out his unpleasant person. Her best guess is that upon moving him outside, flies laid eggs in the cow he always chose to sit in, and they wriggled their way up into his unpleasant person, eating him from the inside out. She's been traumatized and guilt-ridden all these years and told us she still has nightmares about it. Story 5. Yes, I can tell my family story. So my grandfather is roughly 80 and has 5 kids, one of which is my father, all ranging from ages 40, 50. Well, about 3 years ago, he had a knock on the door, and it turns out that he had a family before he met my grandmother in Iowa and never told anyone. He had married his first wife in California when he was sent out there in the Navy and had 2 or 3 kids with her. He went and got himself deployed, and she apparently left with the kids while he was gone. Being the mid-1900s, he never found them, so he went on a cross-country trip to New York for some reason. Luckily for me, he met my grandmother and had 5 kids, never telling anyone about his former life. From what we understood was he graduated school, went into the Navy after working on some farm for a couple years, and tried to go to New York before getting snagged by my GMA in Iowa. Well, while he was doing this, apparently Wife-1 was moving around the country as well, and every couple years, put those kids in adoption, busted them out of adoption, had 3 more kids from 3 different dads, but kept my GPA's same last name. So one of the original first kids went on a mission to find my GPA, found him, and they all came to visit. The best part is my family is super flipping white trash, and they all live in one trailer court owned by my uncle. The new family came, and they just moved right on in, just as white trash as our family. We call them the new family, though they're really the old family, and it's like a redneck turf war. Story 6. Not really that dark, but it was a big one in my family. My grandmother's cousin married a man she met in college. They had a daughter and were married for maybe 40 years. 3 years ago, he passed with cancer. We were not shocked at this. After all, he was approaching 70 and had a bad form of cancer, and it was spreading fast. We were prepared for this. What we weren't prepared for was that after he passed, his wife found a journal of his, which explained that for 35 years, he was having another relationship with a man. It was a shock to all of us. He was so committed to his wife that he never left, but at the same time, it must have terminated him to stay silent for such a long time. It's not a dark secret, but it was a, oh no, well-kept one. Story 7. My parents used to always joke about how we picked the wrong boy at the hospital. I never thought much of it. A year ago, I'm now 17, they told me that when I was born in the almost exact time as a boy whose parents abandoned him, the boy was almost the same size as well. Now, you'd think that this would never happen, but I was born in China at a hospital that somehow mixed us 2 up. Essentially, they weren't exactly sure if I was the son of my parents. My mom looked at the 2 of us and swore that I was the one, despite the nurse's tag stating otherwise. Genetic tests were relatively expensive then and were refused by my mother. They didn't care at the time since there was no parent to claim the other boy. Now I'm about to go off to college, and I have no intention of finding out whether or not I'm the biological son. Strange when I think about the other boy, though. People always say I do look like my parents, though, so I have little doubt that mother knew best. Eat it. More crazy considering that I moved to the U.S. in 5th grade and is now lucky enough to go to a top American school. How different the other boy's life must be is just insane to think about. Story 8. This happened in May of this year. I have a sister who is 4 years older than me and a half-brother who is 14 years older than me, from a different father. My aunt, my mom's sister, sent out an email to the entire family that vented about 60 years of hatred toward my mother. Right at the end of the email, my aunt clearly indicated that my mom had another kid that no one knew about and had given the kid up for adoption. Huge news to my family who knew nothing about this. I asked my mom about this and found out that the father of the kid was my brother's dad, but my mom and him weren't married when this happened 45 years ago, so it was looked down upon by others. My mom eventually married my brother's father and had him, but that was a few years later. After they got a divorce, she got married to my dad about 8 years later. After my aunt sent the email, we found out that she had committed suicide by dousing herself with gasoline, tied herself to a pole in a garden, and somehow managed light herself on fire. Pretty crazy. Story 9. Thought my parents divorced just as a mutual agreement, but my father had an affair. He was a cop and slept with his partner's wife. Up there for biggest piece of cow award. Thought my mom fell and split her eyebrow open, but upon finding out about the affair, she threw a fit, and my father punched her in the face. I was 6 years old when this all happened. 19 now, and just found out a couple months ago. Father also hates me because I decided to get out of the Army after breaking both of my legs at airborne school. Found out he got out of the Marines for having flat feet that hurt. Aunt, his sister, told me that he drove from Georgia to Florida every weekend because he hated his time in the Marines so much. Tries to tell me I am a cat and disowned me. Edit. People have commented reminded me of something else. Sorry for everyone that has similar situations. My condolences. Found out while I was in the Army, Q4 of 2012, that I have a sister. Father knocked some girl up in high school and bailed. She found my brother on Facebook and said she was our sister. She had never met him. Father is also a drunk with 2 DUIs in the last 6 months, so his license is suspended and he can't get to work, ha. Story 10. I live this question. My drunk aunt on the 4th of July told me 2 things that no one else knows. Sorry for the lengthy post. My mom got pregnant when she was a senior in high school by a friend and didn't tell him. She graduated in 1970 and had my oldest sister. Fast forward a few years later, she meets my dad. They get married and have 5 more children. We always knew my oldest sister wasn't my dad's daughter, as my dad is white, my mom Mexican, and my oldest sister half black. But we always considered her our sister, no half-sister conversations. It turns out my grandparents were very ashamed that my mom had been pregnant and unmarried, and they all decided the best thing to do was to give my sister up for adoption. When my mom had her, she just loved her, and my grandparents also decided they were making the wrong decision with adoption. They had no name picked out, so they named her after the only nurse that showed kindness to my mom. Fast forward 14 years, that sister was acting out, mostly due to my physically and emotionally abusive dad, who I still have a complicated relationship with, and she ended up getting pregnant. My dad demanded an abortion. My mom refused, so he took my sister himself. My sister said she miscarried. My mom still doesn't know my aunt later overheard him at the bar we owned discussing the cost with a regular. Okay, #2, so it's 1980. My parents have their 4th child together, 5th total. My sister M is born with partial hearing and some cosmetic birth defects. At the time of her birth, a doctor advised my mom that because of our family history with reproductive issues, she basically needed to throw in the towel and consider herself lucky she had as many healthy children as she did. She got her tubes tied before she left the hospital. A couple years later, she discovers she's pregnant again. Our family in terms of gender at this point is FMMMF. She tells my dad, who tells her in no uncertain terms to abort. She convinces him to wait until she can see her gyno first to see if it was even sustainable. Her doctor tells her they'll do an ultrasound, the only time she's ever had one. Everything is normal, healthy. She's almost 20 weeks and it's a girl. She takes the news to my dad all but that last part. He tells her to abort again, angrily, and she suggests finding out the gender first. She says, "Is there a way you'd consider it if it's a baby girl? They can tell now on the ultrasound." He says no, and later that night says, "Only if it's a boy." My mom calls my aunt crying, who says, "So tell him it's a boy after your next appointment." She does, he's thrilled. They have the baby, and it's the first time my dad's allowed to be in the delivery room. They announce, "It's a girl," and my dad yells at my mom and leaves. He doesn't come back the week she's in the hospital. My uncle does, and since she didn't have a name yet, she asked for his opinion. He said he always thought his name would be cute for a girl. And that, my friends, is why my name is Jerry. Story 11. My mom and I cared for her father as he deteriorated with old age. As his mind went, he told stories from the war, from his youth, and about my grandmother's first husband. My grandpa had a crush on her before WW2, but never acted on it because he was dirt poor. He lied about his age and joined the Navy when he was somewhere between 14 and 16 so he could be respectable, so he could be worthy of her. While he was away, she married a man her parents liked. Her first husband beat her badly, would get drunk and assault her, then call her a whore and make her sleep in the barn. She stayed because divorce wasn't something you did at the time. My grandpa got back, all snazzy in his uniform, and was told she'd married and where she lived. He showed up to say hello, and there she was, a bloody mess. He took her to the doctor, got her cleaned up, and convinced her to divorce him. A year later, they were married. Her ex kept showing up to harass them. The story we'd always been told is that her ex finally got the hint and moved away. The story my grandpa told me in a lucid moment was basically this. I hated him for what he'd done to her. I knew he'd never leave her alone. I made sure he'd never bother her or any other woman again. I think my grandpa confessed to terminating his wife's ex-husband. What you have to keep in mind is that this was a very rural part of the Midwest in the 40s. Hill Justice happened. Story 12. My mom was born in Colombia and moved to the U.S. when she was 12. I never knew much about her family, and was told multiple variations of sugar-coated stories by other family members whenever I tried to find out more about my family history. I was already aware that the Italian side of my family, paternal, had ties to the mob in NJ and eventually moved to Miami where my parents would eventually meet. Through Google, I also found out that my grandfather was a snitch, ended up in the Witness Protection Program after being implicated in a murder and being indicted for selling massive amounts of candy. Okay, I thought, I can deal with that knowledge. Poor about the cola, but maybe my mom's side wasn't so bad. Thanks to ancestry websites and Google, I soon discovered multiple newspaper articles from the 1980s that would indicate that my maternal Colombian grandparents were the leaders of a massive candy smuggling ring, which, at the time, was referred to as the largest candy smuggling operations ever carried out in the U.S. Both my grandparents were sentenced to over 250 years each, but after that my trail ran cold and do not know how or when they passed away. Family rumors would have me believe that my grandfather passed away of a heart attack in jail soon after hearing that my grandmother was murdered in Colombia. My mom never talks about it, and I don't feel comfortable asking. Very few of my friends know about it, but I must say I find it ironic that my Italian paternal grandparents were cola dealers, while my Colombian maternal grandparents were prolific candy smugglers. Story 13. A long time ago, back when I was still in middle school, my mom's best friend passed away. She wouldn't tell me how she passed away, only that it was sudden. When I asked why we weren't going to the funeral, she told me that there wouldn't be one, because her body was being donated to science. I didn't ask any more questions. That was the last time we ever talked about her. Well, 5 months ago, my mom handed me her phone to find the number for Domino's, and as I'm scrolling through her contacts, I come across the phone number of the dead best friend. Biggest WTF moment of my life. The next day, I called it from a payphone at Waffle House, and she picked up. I instantly recognized the voice and accent. She's not dead. Second biggest WTF moment of my life. Story 14. My step-great-grandmother terminated my biological great-grandmother and great-grandfather. She terminated my biological great-grandmother by pushing her off a building. Everyone thought she was drunk because it was some rooftop party back in the 20s. She wanted my great-grandfather because he was wealthy at the time. He lost almost everything in the stock market crash, and when they realized they wouldn't recover, she left him for a man who was still wealthy. My step-great-grandfather poisoned my real great-grandfather. She admitted all this to my mother on her deathbed. Grandma Velma was a flipping psycho. Story 15. We had a family Christmas dinner a few years ago where my aunt and uncles from both sides were staying over at our house. There were probably 10 or 11 of us at the dinner table, and everyone is getting along well like we always do. My cousin, around 14 or 15 at the time, brings up something about how he laid a massive poop earlier that day. The kids laugh and the adults were like, "That's not table conversation." Then I jump in and say, "Haha, yeah, there's things we don't talk at the dinner table like politics and illegitimate children." Every adult at the table drops their eyes to their plate and goes silent. I'm sitting there like, what in the Woody Allen movie is so awkward about all this? What I didn't know is that my uncle had an illegitimate child many years ago, and that's always been a point of contention between my aunt and him. They also had been arguing about that earlier in the day, and all the adults knew it. Haha, man, cow was jokes. But seriously, though, never make jokes about illegitimate children unless you are absolutely sure no one has one. Story 16. Throwaway account for obvious reasons. Just found out my mom was extremely depressed her whole entire life and tried to commit suicide twice, before successfully committing suicide the third time. The first time I found out she was depressed to the sky was when she tried to commit suicide for the second time by overdosing on pain meds. I thought she was napping until I shook her for nearly 20 minutes before calling my dad, where he told me to call 911. For whatever reason, my uncles on my mom's side thought it was my dad's fault for my mom committing suicide, when in all reality, my mom was to the sky way before she ever met my dad. One of my uncles went as far as to say if he sees my dad again, he will stick a gun to his head and blow his brains out. We contacted a local sheriff, but he couldn't really do anything, since there's no hard evidence. My mom never fully finished her will, so all her money went to her most blood-related relatives, when over $10,000 was supposed to go to me and my brother. My mom's family won't give up the money, and they said if we try to take it through court, they'll make oh no sure me, my dad's, and my future children's life are all hell. Story 17. Coupled with the facts that I'm typing this on a phone and I'm 99% sure no one will read this, I'll try to keep it brief. Oh, and it wasn't my family. It was my girlfriend's, but here goes anyhow. Around 1994-ish, I had my first girlfriend. I was maybe 19, late bloomer, I know. Anyhow, this was the days when AOL was big and dial-up was the thing. My brother and I figured out that with AOL, you could open a user file with a text reader, we used Xtree Gold if I remember right, and basically read, edit all the emails of anyone who used that computer. So my brother and I used to fudge with each other by editing emails and other wackiness. Funny side note, we also used to edit games. For instance, then my brother would play Mortal Kombat. We figured out the Raiden wins, or whichever player you were, was just a text file. So a funny way we used to insult each other would be to change it to say, Steven sucks cock, or whatever. Anyhow, I used to go to my girlfriend's parents' house a lot and spend the night. She lived a good 2 hours away. We met online, so we would sleep on her floor in the living room. It was in the middle of the house, so the parents considered it safe, but we had close relationship there all the time. So her mom was a real cool lady who played Slingo all the time on AOL. I never played it, but I do know it was a game that was largely based on just chatting with others while it was being played. Well, her mom was always playing it, and was oddly strange about us watching her play, and it weirded my girlfriend out. Also, my girlfriend mentioned that her mom was very protective of her account, and if she walked in the room when her mom was writing an email, she would panic and close AOL down all fast. So one night the girlfriend told me she thought her mom might be having cyber-sex or something of that sort with another dude, who wasn't her husband, and she wished she could read her emails. Well, I told her about the trick, and it turned out the mom was having full-on close relationship with some other dude. She apparently masked it as going out on some church outing, but was meeting some guy and going at it like rabbits. Well, this was all described in detail in the emails, which my girlfriend read all of. My girlfriend ended up printing out all of the emails and handed it directly to her dad. Long story short, they were divorced soon after. Another funny side note, she eventually moved in with me and cheated on me. Her dad, who was a huge ex-biker gang guy, came up the last day she was with me to move. I didn't know what he was going to do because he was super protective of his daughters, and she was deliriously upset I broke up with her. Anyhow, he walked up to me, put his hand on my shoulder, crouched down, looked me in the eye, and said, "Like mother, like daughter," and walked away. Story 18. My family suspects my great-grandfather in the murder of my great-grandmother. People asked for details, so here's an edit. He had what we suspect were undiagnosed schizophrenia symptoms. Some males in my family have diagnosed similar problems. Their marriage was emotionally abusive. My grandmother, their only child, recounts him being amazingly cold. She's never told me she suspects him, but all her children do. The police recorded it as a botched home invasion and didn't investigate him. They were divorced by that time. Only his old things were missing from the house, and the murder weapon was ruled to be an unaccounted-for axe. He continued to have odd relations to the rest of the family, coming for Christmas, etc., because they didn't have proof. They didn't confront him. A picture of him hangs in my grandmother's house because her mother painted it. It's somewhat haunting. Story 19. My mom's side of the family tends to not be very pleasant. Thus, my mom keeps my family out of their affairs unless it's a funeral. Because of this, I never knew about a few of my cousins until recently. Turns out I have a cousin who once went out drunk driving in the winter and hit a car with a young family in it. His stupidity terminated the mother, severed the father's legs off, nearly disemboweled the toddler via seatbelt, and shook up the baby. After all of that, my aunt still claims that her precious baby boy is completely innocent, and God works in mysterious ways. I'm pretty happy that my mom never brought us around them. Story 20. Got real drunk with my dad after my first combat tour. He's also a combat vet, Vietnam era. We were talking about terminating and the feelings that go along with it, mostly pleasure and shame for that pleasure. And he spilled the beans about some cow. He told me my mother was assaulted violently shortly after they were married in the late 60s, got pregnant, and carried the child to term. All this time, I've thought she was just my oldest sister. At the time, he was very recently discharged and hadn't yet moved away from the Camp Pendleton area, so he snatched up a few of the guys from his old unit, rented a panel van, and kidnapped the... They took the guy out in the middle of nowhere, gang assaulted and terminated him and threw him into a ravine. To me, the most absurd part about the whole thing was how he described justifying it internally. He studied economics after he got out, and his rationale was basically, if there's a hell, I'm already going for some other cow, so my marginal cost of further sinning is basically zero. Crazy cow. Edit clarity. Story 21. I am named after my great-aunt. I was told by my mother and my grandmother that she passed away a few years before I was born in a terrible motorcycle accident. I was also told never to bring up my great-aunt's name around my great-grandmother, as the loss of her daughter still troubled her. Understandable. Nothing was ever mentioned or said, and I grew up understanding only the barest of details about her and her passing. A little odd to not know much about the person I was named after, but whatever. When I was 24, my great-grandmother passed away. At the meal after her wake, my great-uncle gets drunk and starts letting all the family secrets fly out. In passing, he mentioned my great-aunt's suicide, and everyone at the table solemnly nodded their heads except for me. What suicide? I asked. Gran told me she passed away in a motorcycle accident. Yeah, that was the cover story, he replied. Your great-grandmother was too embarrassed to tell anyone what really happened, and she had to explain the closed casket at her daughter's funeral. I came to find out my great-aunt was a sapphic and in love with a woman from her university. The other woman felt the same way, and they hatched plans to figure out a way to be together without their parents knowing. When my great-grandmother discovered their plans, she went mental and sent my great-aunt halfway across the country to separate the two. Little did she know that both women had made a suicide pact that if this were to happen, they would shoot themselves in the head, which they did. My great-grandmother, in her homophobia, caused two young women in love to terminate themselves. Apparently, she never forgave herself for what she did, and it haunted her till the day she passed away. After I found out the truth, I was first incredulous that my entire family had lied to me about the origin of my name, and second, I was deeply disturbed that to ease my great-grandmother's guilt and shame, everyone accepted the lie. Since then, I tell as many people the truth as are willing to listen so that my great-aunt's memory is served. Which is why I am posting this here. Every year since I found out, I have attended Pride. I donate to LGBT charities, I volunteer for LGBT organizations, all in her memory. If certain resources and volunteer organizations existed then as they do now, I might have a totally awesome motorcycle-riding great-aunt to hang out with. Story 22. After my uncle passed away, the family came out with the, yeah, he was boy, and was molested as a child at the church. But we held back the truth so we would not smear the Catholic name. It's also why we stopped going back to that church. Flipping bigots, the lot of them. No one liked Uncle Benny, but one of my proudest moments was when he tried to make it painfully obvious that he was boy by asking the family if they'd like to watch Brokeback Mountain with him, and that it would mean a lot to him. Everyone meandered out of the living room, but I sat my peach there and watched it with him. He had a deadly silent fart during the movie, but I held my breath and didn't make it awkward like a champ. Story 23. I was a twin, but was not told until I was 18. Context. When I was 18, my mom starts taking Ambien. One night, she's on her way to bed and starts kind of sleep-talking because the Ambien is kicking in. She mentions something about your sister to me, but I can't make it out and figure it's gibberish. I don't have a sister, just an older brother. Next day, I laughing mention how funny she acts when she's like that, and remind her not to take her Ambien until she's actually asterisk in bed asterisk. And I mention what she said. The look of shock she gave me was so unexpected. And then immediately, she starts tearing up and getting emotional, starts saying, "We never wanted to tell you when you were a kid. It was too morbid to make you think or worry about that when you were too little to understand." At first, I thought she was joking, because it suddenly just got to be such a weird conversation. Really fast. Didn't seem possible. Who expects such secrets? Anyway, I've always known my mom technically passed away on the table when I was born. They shocked her back to life. but I never knew *Y* until then. Turns out we were twins. My twin passed away and was stillborn, but the twins' distress caused a very rough delivery for my mom, who ended up almost dead herself. I was born, they never told me, and not a soul in the entire extended family ever mentioned it, and my brother was too young to remember, or I'm sure he would have. So I just listened in shock as my mom told me all this. Weird to think I could have an identical twin sister right now. Story 24. Some background? My parents had his and hers closets, and for as long as I could remember, my father always told me I was not allowed in his closet under any circumstances. Fine by me. Fast forward to about 3 years ago. I had recently taken a test and lost a couple points on what I believed to be an issue of semantics. And I asked my father, among other people, whether or not he agreed it was simply an issue of semantics. He wasn't sure, but he thought I was right. I argued with the teacher the next day and got the points back. But I was still curious, so I decided to Google the issue. I found a forum post with the exact same issue, same question I'd had on the test. So I figured it was someone I'd asked earlier, but the profile picture was some woman I'd never met. Figuring it may have been someone's spouse/girlfriend/etc., I decided to search the user's posting history. And that's how I learned my dad is a transvestite. First thing I did was open his closet and confirm. Story 25. When my brother and I were 9-10, we basically outed my dad as being boy. At the time, they had a friend of theirs living with us who was going through a bad divorce, and my brother stumbled upon some boy-censored photos in the house. We were laughing at it because we didn't even understand what it was, but my dad got upset and told us it belonged to this woman. Flash forward 6 months, and we got our first family computer. This was back when people still used AOL and dial-up. The woman was no longer living with us, yet my brother and I kept finding boy-censored photos on our computer. I'm assuming my father figured we weren't savvy enough to figure out how to do anything but play solitaire, so he wasn't that careful. We kept quiet because we weren't sure how to handle it. By the time we were 12-13, we started asking our mom, who was still married to him, questions. And she admitted that right after I was born, I'm the youngest, he divorced her and left her with both of us to go explore himself. He later came back and they remarried. She knew that he may have been bisexual, but thought he was determined to make their relationship work. By the time we hit our teen years, it was obvious he was not bisexual, nor was he interested in having a relationship with my mother, despite the fact that he did not want to end their marriage. This has led to a rocky relationship with my father. I'm bitter that he kept my mom in a relationship with him for appearances rather than allowing her to find someone who would love and care for her as a husband and wife. I'm angry at the fact that because I did not grow up with an example of a normal husband-wife relationship, I have difficulties relating to my SO. I'm also upset that growing up my father was always angry, yelling and verbally abusive towards me and physically abusive towards my brother. At times it felt like he cherished us, and at other times we felt like burdens to him. At least now I understand that it wasn't us but him that he was angry with. I feel that he was bitter about his attractiveness and at the world in general, and he took it out on us. Now he's paranoid that we all keep secrets behind his back, like he did to us. If I tell my mother something going on in my life, like deciding to go back to school or that I might go out of town with my friends without informing him first, he accuses us of being liars and keeping secrets from him. Keep in mind, I'm in my mid-20s, graduated college, and no longer live in the same town as he does. Recently, we found out that the entire time I was growing up, he was having secret hookups with random men, so that's a whole new thing to deal with. Honestly, I don't care that he's boy. I've participated in pride events. Many of my best friends are boy. It's what he has put my mom through. If he knew he was boy, he should have left her and been truthful to himself. He could do that and still have been a father. But instead, he put my mother in a position where she was in a dead-end relationship without realizing it, all the while cheating on her, which would be just as upsetting if he had been cheating on her with women. His attractiveness is no longer a secret. If someone asks, he tells them, and he will often go on dates. I'm happy that he's finally accepting myself. I just hate what he put the rest of my family through to get there. Story 26. My mom grew up an only child and always wanted a brother or sister. About 2 years before my grandmother passed away, at 86, my mom found out she has a half-sister, the product of my grandmother, the cook's daughter, and the son of the family that owned the big house. The half-sister was adopted by people in the same town, but she and my mom used to play together as children, not knowing that they were sisters. Grandma flatly refused to talk about the adopted daughter when my mom broached the subject, and although Mom contacted her half-sister and went to Canada to spend time with her, Grandma passed away without seeing her daughter. After the funeral, Mom and her half-sister decided to get a DNA test to make sure they really were half-sisters. Turns out they are full sisters, and the man my mom grew up with as Dad wasn't her biological father. Dark horse, my grandma. Story 27. It's always been the dark secret in my family that my older cousin was conceived as the result of an affair. The man who was cheated on is one of my dad's oldest friends, and he had been with the mother since they were like 12. However, she cheated, and my cousin was the result. I later discovered that this story is not true. The mother asterisk thought asterisk she got pregnant as a result of the affair, so she dumped my dad's friend and married the man she had cheated on him with. However, when my older cousin got to be about 5, the mother noticed that she looked suspiciously like the ex on whom she had cheated. Her husband also noticed this, so he decided he wanted a paternity test. The test came back that he was not my cousin's father. He was, however, the father of my younger cousin, who was born shortly before he demanded the test. He divorced the mother and left asterisk both asterisk kids with her and went on to have another family. This means that my older cousin's asterisk actual asterisk father is the ex who was cheated on. He went on to become the president of a bank, whereas my cousins and their mother struggled in abject poverty for literally their entire lives up to very recently. The mother never once told her ex he had a daughter he didn't know about, in spite of the fact that they've continued to have amicable associations, through church and stuff, over the years. My dad confessed this nugget to me on a fishing trip a couple years back, but I had guessed at it before. She really is the spitting image of her actual father. Story 28. My grandma almost gunned down my grandpa with a .357 first time he got drunk and went to beat her. Having a history of abuse, she wasn't taking any more cow. Second, something I found out, she divorced her ex-husband that abused her and my mom and 2 aunts before she met my grandpa, who she was happily married to, by tying him to the bed and dumping a giant candy of boiled water on him. Told him she was leaving, and if he followed, she would terminate him. She didn't fudge around, refused to be a victim. I resented how hard she was on us until I found out in my late teens where she had come from. Everything made sense after that, and I had newfound love and respect. I was adopted and raised by my grandparents. Well, Grandma Edit, she joked the gun wasn't loaded. But it served as a sobering reminder why my grandpa shouldn't drink. Story 29. Both sets of my great-grandparents must have had loads of secrets. This isn't really a dark secret. However, this one time a woman came up to me and my great-granny in town and said that my great-granny probably saved her life. Turns out shortly after the WW2, she was riding the train with her 6 children to get away from the Russians. She had a whole train compartment to herself, and they shared it with a young woman who was around 16, 17. From time to time, the train would stop, and sometimes Russian soldiers would search through the train. So my great-granny hid the young woman under all the clothes, and the kids had to sit on the clothes pile. The Russian would always ignore my great-granny with all the kids. They even gave her some food. But she said she could hear all the screams from the girls in the next compartment as they probably got assaulted. P.S. Sorry my amazingly bad storytelling abilities, in English.